to stop the world seeing the reality there. And it's a matter of pride to me that the EU, in its rather symbolic human rights dialogue, always raises the case that my friends Gao Shisheng, his friend Hu Jia, and Liu Xiaobo, as well as Chen Guangcheng. Last few days, Hu Jia met his friend Chen Guangcheng in Beijing. And he said, Chen said, brother. I recall the words of the Ode to Joy, the choral symphony of Beethoven, where Schiller wrote, alle Menschen werden Brüder. All men must be brothers. I'm changing my Twitter, Facebook icon today to put on dark glasses. That's all I have to say. Thank you. It does plays an enormously valuable role in trying to bring values to countries that don't really want them. And not only that, but also aid. And as it happens, a young friend of mine has come back from working with the United Nations in Haiti, and my niece is going out on Thursday back to southern Sudan, where she's working in the UN refugee camp. So it's those personal contributions that Rolf mentions, which I think all of you know so well. And so, on the one hand, you need the institutions, on the other hand, you need the people. But the EU is unique in the world. It is 27 countries sharing common values and a democratic process, imperfect though it may be. And we have the ability to say things that other bodies cannot do, especially the European Parliament, that does not answer to a government in the way that a national parliament traditionally does. And so we have a greater freedom to express those values, and we try to do that with our resolutions and our actions. It seems to me that we should try and avoid, as far as possible, not just the double standards, but the triple standards. To come back to your point about, for example, Sudan, Bashir travels relatively freely within Africa. But it is also true that most cases currently before the ICC are from Africa. That in itself is double standards. And I think that we need to consider how we, I'm not saying impose, but generate a worldwide conception that somehow the ICC is a world court, and it should be dealing with parts of the world that currently regard it with impunity. That's why I mentioned the earlier possibility of an impunity register. When I was watching videos earlier on, I recall the courage of Hu Jia, who in 2007 spoke to a press conference I organised in London from his flat in Beijing. Before we arranged this, I said, "You do fully understand the risk you run." He said to me, "I run a greater risk if I don't speak out." And he was speaking out on behalf of his friend Gao Shisheng, the Christian human rights lawyer who was imprisoned in 2006. Then Hu Jia spoke to a conference in Brussels, and then to our Human Rights Committee. That was too much for the authorities, so they arrested him and imprisoned him. And we awarded him the next year the Sakharov Prize. But what we were doing was giving him a voice. And he accepted the risks of that, and continues to speak out. He's an immensely courageous man, and I believe that he and others who are the more visible activists within China represent something that is the future of that great country, and not its awful past. When I come to the role of the United States, this is relatively controversial. I'm an admirer of Barack Obama. He made a great speech in Cairo University in June 2009, where he said, "My administration has replaced the business as usual approach, the economic relationship, the dominance of stability, by the search for democracy." He gave great hope to people in the Arab world at that point. Unfortunately, the Americans did not really follow through. And when Hillary Clinton first went to Beijing, she said, "Human rights and democracy trump the economy." Then she changed her policy. So to me it's very concerning that this week she remained unable to stand behind that process which is going on in the undergrowth of China, and which is now becoming more and more visible, where people are speaking out. And the most tragic aspect of that is, of course, the self-immolation by Tibetan monks and others, the most extreme form of sacrifice in a country like China, or in Tibet, where suicide is regarded as a sin. So what we need to do is to maintain our values, to be consistent and coherent on human rights and democracy, especially on human rights. That's a universal value. Democracy can change from country to country. And as Winston Churchill once said, democracy is an awful system, but it's an awful lot better than all the other ones put together. So that's why I believe very strongly that the European Union has a role to play. It is playing it. It is a bit bureaucratic, but it has those values. It is projecting them through organisations like yours, and it's doing an incredibly valuable job. But above all, it is giving hope to people who are otherwise hopeless. In the same way that when I used to go to Central and Eastern Europe, to Poland or Czechoslovakia, where it was, before the fall of the Berlin Wall, all we want is a normal country. We want to come back to Europe. Well, the very existence of the European Union made that great change in 1989, and it continues to this day. There are many problems around our borders, in Belarus or in Russia and elsewhere. We need to keep saying very clearly, very deliberately, to those dictators, to those autocrats, that we stand for human rights, we stand for democracy, the rule of law, fundamental freedoms, and we will continue to do this. And I would like to conclude by the remark of a great friend of mine, now dead, Lord Bethel, founder of the European Parliament's Human Rights Committee, a very uncompromising activist, also one of the greatest conservatives I can remember in my lifetime, who was a friend of Andrei Sakharov, Yelena Bonner, Sharansky, the dissidents in those very dark days of the Cold War. And he always spoke very clearly and consistently about the human rights abuses in Russia. And the Foreign Office in London said, please stop talking about the Katyn massacre. It was a Nazi crime. And to me, he was a model of how you should speak out, speak clearly, speak consistently. If you can, and he did and could, I do very regularly criticize various regimes. Not because I'm irresponsible, but because I believe that I'm speaking for the people within those regimes, within those countries, who need a voice outside. And that's why I'm disappointed in Hillary Clinton's failure to take Chen Guangcheng back in her plane to Washington. Why, when Cathy Ashton goes around the world, she does speak fairly clearly, but sometimes, to come back to your point about Haiti, it's a bit too soup.